Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
Our first guest is a brilliant author and journalist. Read him at jamesperloff.com. That's his website. The author of terrific books, The Shadows of Power, The Council on Foreign Relations and the American Decline, and Truth is a Lonely Warrior, Unmasking the Forces Behind Global Destruction. He's also a regular guest on media, on television and radio around the world. We love him. Let's welcome back to the show our friend James Perloff. James, welcome back.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you so much for having me back on.
Great to have you back on. Lots to talk about today. I want to first of all jump straight in there with this. The big story, of course, broke this afternoon, our time. You'll be following it, and that is the National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn, has resigned because of the Logan Act. He had a conversation while he was a private citizen with a Russian diplomat. There's been a big storm about that, and allegedly the White House asked for his resignation, which he gave. Now, a lot of people are saying, when I say a lot of people, I mean a lot of independent commentators in the United States are saying that the military-industrial complex has it in for Trump and has it in for this guy, and this is what's going on. Now, you'll have a more savvy approach, I think, than most. What's happening here? What do you think is going on, James?
Well, the first thing is that it's too soon to tell. I would say it's obvious that somebody in the deep state really has it in for Flynn. He only lasted apparently a matter of hours as National Security Advisor officially. As to why they wanted to get rid of him, the Logan Act doesn't really make any sense because, the Logan Act is a long-standing law that says American officials cannot engage in private negotiations with foreign officials, and that makes sense. Everything should be above board. But the problem with that is our officials all the time go to the Bilderberg meetings, and as you know, they engage in private meetings and private negotiations with foreign officials all the time at the Bilderberg conference, and the mass media never gets bent out of shape about that. And I was also impressed that this happened so swiftly that there seemed to be no real investigation going on. And it almost seems that his resignation was forced upon him so very quickly. So it appears that a lot of pressure was being applied, Richie.
James, were you staggered by Trump's interview with Bill O'Reilly before the Super Bowl when he said, and this is why it's so difficult when you talk about Trump, I'm not going to make my opinion on him, known again, because my listeners know what I think. I think he, is every bit as much establishment as anybody else. I'm not going to go into that. But still, even me, I'm blown away when I see a guy staring down, a very senior member of the press, idiotic as O'Reilly is. He's a very senior presenter. And Trump looks at him and says, basically, we're no angels. Don't be talking about Russia and stuff like that because we are no angels. It was staggering stuff, James. When you saw that interview, what did you make of that?
I have to tell you, frankly, I didn't see that interview, but I'm very glad that he made that remark, that he's taken a position of non-American exceptionalism in this case, because it's obvious that Putin, unlike the United States, is not sending his troops and deploying his ships into our hemisphere over here. He is not being the aggressor, despite his being stereotyped that way by the American mainstream media. Yeah,
I found it incredible. Despite my belief that the House always wins with these guys, I do believe that. I do believe that Trump is a genuine narcissist, a genuine larger-than-life personality. And even if he is being controlled, it would be more subtly than maybe previous presidents, because the guy shoots from the hip and he says whatever comes into his mind at the time. I just found that kind of staggering. So on Flynn, it's a bit early to say yet whether or not it is because the deep state is trying to get at Trump because of the things maybe that Flynn has said about the CIA. It's just a bit too early, right? We can leave that there for the moment.
It's definitely too early, but I will say that what they've targeted him for is discussions with Russia, and as you know, they've been targeting Russia for some time. They claimed without evidence that Russia had hacked our election. And there have been many provocations to Russia. I think that they're still steamed up about his intervention in Syria. They were knocking off Middle East countries one by one. Iraq fell in Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi fell in Libya, and Assad was next in line. And Putin stood up and said, that's enough. But you saw what happened after that. As soon as he intervened in Syria, that civilian airliner that took off from Egypt crashed, and There was a shoot down of an Su-24, and of course, more recently there was the assassination of the Russian ambassador to Turkey. There was an attempt on the takedown of MH317, which some people thought was an attempt on Putin, and there was the death of his chauffeur in that very strange accident, the crash of the Russian Army choir plane, the denial of Russian track athletes to the Olympics, the expulsion of a diplomat. So it's safe to say that the deep state doesn't like Putin. And perhaps the fact that he was negotiating favorably to remove some of these sanctions on Russia was the main reason. Maybe this is more about Russia than it was about Flynn.
You know, on Russia, you might know this, you might not, because you're a few hours behind us. But one of the favourites for the French presidential election is a guy called Emmanuel Macron. And he's young, I suppose he's reasonably attractive. He's seen as a very centre-right type guy, very pro-European Union. He's been telling the French press overnight, James, that he believes that the Russians are interfering in the election in France, which takes place, of course, in May. I mean, James, you couldn't... And at the same time, British intelligence agencies are going on television here saying that the Russians are trying to hack us. And what's lacking here, Mr. Perloff? What's always lacking? Evidence. There's no evidence. It's wonderful. In this world, I can say, James Perloff, I'm sure it was James Perloff that stole from the supermarket across the street from me today. But Perloff lives in America. It doesn't matter. I'm telling you, he did it. All right, then, he did it. I mean, James, what's going on? People couldn't be that stupid, right?
It seems to be the standard excuse, you know. I heard that they were claiming that Russia hacked the Brexit vote earlier on. And it just became the thing to say. We have this very pro-war senator here, Lindsey Graham, and he claimed he was hacked by the Russians. You know, it just became a cliche, and then none of these people provided any evidence for it whatsoever.
This is the world we live in, and you've been writing about these subjects and researching them for a long, long time. And I think one of the times you were on, I think you and I talked about we don't live in a post-truth world at all. You know, sexy as that saying is, that cliche is, we live in a post-evidence world, don't we? People can say whatever they want about anybody. Doesn't matter. Evidence or no evidence. It's crazy. And that brings us around 27 minutes to the top of the hour. I want to talk about, you know, I suppose it's been about a year and a half to 18 months since the series of attacks on France began. And we have a lot of issues with those attacks and the nature of them and the evidence and all of that, no doubt about that. But since then, Paris is basically under the control of the French military. And it's one of these big stories, James. It's like one of the biggest stories in the world, but nobody's talking about it outside of the independent media. It's an extraordinary thing. Parisians have gotten used to going about their business and tipping a nod to a combat soldier. And I shouldn't laugh because I really don't find this funny. You wrote a brilliant article. I think you wrote it in January. And folks, I can't recommend jamesperloff.com highly enough. It was a marvellous article about America and Russia changing places, and you talked about the terrible, terrible things that you researched years and years ago about the fascist, communist, the terrible state of Russia, what it did to people, and how you're seeing that, erosion of freedom of speech, people being imprisoned for nothing, coming to the United States. You look at what's happening in Paris, James. This is massive what's happening. It really is in our time, in our lifetime, what's going on with the hyper-militarization of the police, the army presence, and yet there isn't a whisper about it on the media, right?
Except for the alternative media, such as your show. You're right, and the police state is definitely part of totalitarianism. It's all about control, and it's my understanding now that half the French army is deployed on the streets of France. And there's a couple of views within the alt media here in America. Of course, Trump has a lot of supporters that really believe the Muslim narrative ever since 9/11, that they're the ones who are behind all the attacks. However, those of us who have followed the inside job aspect of 9/11 know that many of these attacks have been carried out by the state itself. In fact, Robert Steele, who's a former case officer for the CIA, has stated, he told this to RT, but and many other alt media sources as well, that virtually every terror attack carried out in the United States has been either implemented by our own intelligence services or provoked by them. And this is where the divide is. Many of Trump's supporters are going to back him for wars against Muslim states, thinking that, if we see more terror attacks, it's the Muslims behind it. Those of us who are not alt media and have been watching these events from the viewpoint of what's going on behind the scenes believe it's the deep state carrying this on in order to generate the police state that they require for their totalitarian New World Order.
And last week, Trump said that there's been an increase in the numbers of officers shot and killed on the streets, and he talked about taking serious action against that. He ignored, of course, the fact that, hundreds and hundreds of people are shot dead by police officers. Did you see that speech? Or, I don't mean did you see it yourself physically, but do you take from that speech that there's a lot to worry about with respect to his domestic policing policies and what might be rolled out under Trump's presidency?
Yeah, I am concerned about that. I am concerned that, as far as the immigration goes, I certainly don't want to see what happened to America, what's happening right now in Europe, where culture is being destroyed. That's part of this whole Zionist New World Order agenda,
yes,
is to throw these cultures against each other, create internal violence, which excuses the police state. I do want reasonable restraints on immigration, but I'm very concerned. Ron Paul said this during the campaign between Hillary and Trump. He said, I hear very little talk about civil rights or the Constitution during this campaign. And I am concerned that as perhaps more state-instituted, deep state-instituted terror events occur, and there's more roundups of people without due process, that we will lose more constitutional liberties here.
No doubt. James Perloff is on the line. Folks, keep the tweets coming in. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter. You can follow James on Twitter, simply at James Perloff. 23 minutes to the top of the hour. We've got James for about 15 more minutes. Plenty of comments coming in. I will get to them shortly. So, I mean, there were those who supported Donald Trump who thought that if and when he did get elected, and then when he did win, there were people saying, well, this is great now. Trump understands why the countries in the Middle East are in the mess they are. He understands why the migrant crisis really happened. Trump is going to roll back from America being interventionist. He understands all of this, and this is going to be great. But what he's doing is, and he's helped by some of the independent media, he's not taking the moderate and sensible line that you've taken, James, because I wholeheartedly agree with you, regardless of who's caused the migrant crisis or who hasn't. And we know who's caused it. We know the forces behind ISIS. But you and I also know these are not black and white issues, no pun intended. They are very grey area issues. And even though we know that our intelligence agencies are covertly destroying these countries, the fact is the flow of migrants into countries is about diluting culture. There's no doubt about that. And setting us against one another, divide and conquer. What do you bloody well do, James, about that? This is the $64 million question, because we know there are genuine people, God love them, and you can see them. They are bewildered, they are frightened, they are shocked by what they've seen in Syria, women carrying children and men, and they're like, what the hell is going on? And they need somewhere to go, and the compassionate part of you wants to do what's right for them and help them out, but at the same time, the devil on your left shoulder is saying, but Richie, you know what's really going on here. It's a catch-22, James, right?
Right, and we can't be taken in by those images of women, because we know that most of the immigrants coming into Europe right now are military age, recruiting age men who are raping women and causing all kinds of turmoil for Europe right now. And this is the divide and conquer strategy. You know, the natural cultural divisions and ethnic divisions of countries are normal and natural. These are people who, for the most part, came from common ancestors. They speak a common language. And part of the New World Order plan, and I spoke about this in my book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, which was written before this European migrant crisis began. I talked about multiculturalism and how the New World Order uses that to divide nations, because when you have a country like France, which is united by loyalty to flag, a common culture and a common language, and you bring in people who speak Arabic, who have no loyalty to the French tradition, its culture, and to the French people, you create a culture clash and the nation divides and you get the police state as you do now. That's exactly what they want. So it's nothing against those Arabic-speaking people at all. But I think as far as solutions go, Vladimir Putin said it very well. I'm just paraphrasing him. He said, but the solution is to restore peace to the Middle East so these people can stay in their own homes, not have a million Muslims migrate to Germany as Angela Merkel wants to have happen. But of course, you and I know that the origin of this problem was, even before the origin of the problem, the refugee crisis, of course, is the Middle East wars are bombing the 7 countries General Wesley Clark said we'd take out in 2001, Libya and Iraq and Syria, destabilized Egypt, Afghanistan. We've created that crisis, but of course it started even before then in 1948 with the creation of the Zionist state, which is, what the Rothschilds want to be the capital of their New World Order. But we've created it. We're sympathetic to these refugees, but the real solution is to get rid of the deep state, honestly, as difficult and challenging as that would be. Get rid of the deep state, restore peace to the Middle East, let people live in their natural homes and live in peace and prosperity, as countries like Syria once knew.
Let me take you up on one thing you said there. I agree with what you said about young men, and you see them at the Calais camp in France, a lot of young men, no doubt about that. But it's estimated, and this is not just mainstream sources now, if you combine all the different sources, it's estimated there's about 4.5 million people have had to leave Syria. Maybe you and I, because I've been guilty of this as well, maybe we need to be a bit careful when we say they're all men, or most of them are men and most of them are military age. There are a lot of families in there as well, James, right? We got to be careful of that, I think. What do you think?
Oh, you're right. There's a balance there. I just think that the mainstream media has painted it too much. In fact, during the Super Bowl, there was a commercial about a Mexican migrant woman with her child coming to America. And why do they pick a woman? Because that's what they want to emphasize. And you might recall there was this baby Elan who was positioned at the water line on the beach by a cameraman in order to make a more sympathetic image. This is right before the refugee crisis began. So they're using women and children. No doubt, Richie, there are women and children among them, but the numbers have been exaggerated, I believe, and played up by the media to generate sympathy, to get this multicultural crisis proceeding.
I echo that. I endorse what you said there. Interestingly, about baby Aylan, who I think genuinely died, but I think what happened, the way his body was treated, exactly as you said there, the positioning of the body, it was disgusting. His aunt gave an interview to RT, and she was incredibly eloquent. She's in Canada, and she came across as a lovely woman. And what was really interesting about it, James, was she was very condemning of the Western media's coverage of Syria. And she refused to go along with this. Assad is killing all his own people. She wouldn't have it. And I thought that was fantastic. It really was really good. She gave a terrific interview. In fact, I've been trying to track her down to see can I get her on this programme. There's nothing funny about this, but you have to have a laugh sometimes. 16 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. RT reported today, James. You're ready to start laughing. I don't mind. In television and radio circles, as you know, when you laugh uncontrollably, it's called corpsing. Feel free to corpse. Greece are going to call in the Rothschilds to help them navigate their debts with their creditors. This is reported by RT today. I thought it was April 1st. I swear to Jesus. I double-checked the story. Yes. What's his name? Alexis Tsipras, who I take great credit, the only time I was ever right in my life. The day he got elected, I called him out for what he was. I knew who he was. And Varoufakis, Herman Munster, the clown that came in with him. Tsipras has gone to the Rothschilds to help them with their standoff with their creditors. Over to you. Couldn't get any more bizarre, right?
Well, I made a meme of Tsipras taken from Star Wars, where he's Luke and Darth Vader is saying, "Come to the dark side."
Yeah.
Trying to have the Rothschilds solve your dilemma. That's like when America asked the Rothschilds to create our Federal Reserve, so we wouldn't have another banking crisis like we had in 1907, which, by the way, was created by J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller, who were simply proxies of the Rothschilds. So absolutely horrific and the worst possible remedy. It's like having the asking the fox to come in and check out a sick hen.
It is. Somebody also said on Facebook today, it's like Count Dracula getting the job guarding the blood bank overnight. It's just unbelievable. You couldn't make it up. It's one of those. I saw it today. David Icke, I think, on davidicke.com, David shared it on his headline page, and I just laughed out loud. And then I went and looked at it again and again and again. Let me read a couple of tweets and a couple of emails. Alan tweets, Richie, I love James Perloff. Invite him on more often. James is welcome on this programme anytime he wants. He doesn't have to wait to be asked. Follow him at James Perloff on Twitter. Mark tweets this, Richie, is the cause of the problem scripted corruption in refugee nations? See the Titanic scene of the swamping lifeboat. So Mark is suggesting that maybe even the numbers are exaggerated. So when I said the mean figure of refugees is 4.5 million, Mark is suggesting that might be exaggerated. It might be. What do you think, James?
I actually have no idea. I would think they might tend to downplay it in order to get more refugees in order to fool the public from their strategic perspective. But I don't know the true numbers. And that's a great question. That's something that media should be investigating, and perhaps Mark is right about that.
Good stuff. Sean McTee tweets this. He says, countries like France and the US bombed the effing shit out of Syria, Algeria, etc. They just can't wash their hands of it now, says Sean. And this is why we say it's not black and white, Sean. This is why we say there are shades of grey here. Because the agenda wants to overwhelm countries with refugees, because public services in those countries are destroyed. Am I right, James? Do you want to talk about that? The destruction of public services like the health service, like social welfare. That's why one of the reasons they want to overwhelm us with asylum seekers, right?
Well, if you have danger, if you're in a neighborhood and the houses are on fire, you grab your family and you flee. So these people are doing something that's normal. I do believe that some of them are coming in as provocateurs and militants to disrupt the culture, but no question about the fact that the dangers we've created has created a non-safe space for those people, and so they're moving out to get away from it. By the way, I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of this has to do with the ultimate Rothschild plan of creating space for a greater Israel.
I've had an email from Dawn, and Dawn says, Richie, please ask James, does he think a false flag attack might be planned in order to shape the presidency of Donald Trump? Now, this is a brilliant question, and it's come up before on the programme. In fact, one of our recent guests, I think Kevin Barrett, suggested he wouldn't be surprised if a Trump building was attacked. What do you think, James?
I certainly would have no idea and wouldn't want to predict where it would happen, but I do believe that that's very possible. Trump has done a lot of positive things. He's gone against TPP, and he said he'll support the Second Amendment. One thing I really like best about him is he's talked to Robert F. Kennedy about working on a vaccine task force. I would love to see something like that. And he's repealing Obamacare. And I don't think he's going to push transgenderism. But what's got me most worried about Trump, Richie, is the Zionist connections. Trump is the only person who ever made a campaign commercial for Israeli television for Benjamin Netanyahu. And if you've ever watched Brother Nathaniel's video called Trump's Deck of Jewish Cards, which was made well over a year ago, he talks about Trump's IOUs to the Zionist bankers who bailed him out. And he specifically mentioned Jared Kushner, who Ivanka converted to Judaism to marry, and also Carl Icahn. Now we see Carl Icahn as a special advisor to Trump and Jared Kushner as senior advisor to Trump. It's very worrying. I'm just going to mention some other things in regard to this, Richie. Kushner's top aide is Abraham Berkowitz, whose first cousin was a former president of AIPAC. That is the main Israeli lobby group here affecting Congress. Also, Trump has promised to move, or did promise, he's now backing off, to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv. And if you know the Rothschild plan, having Jerusalem as the capital of world government is a major part of their plan. I can give you a quote from Ben Gurion, the first Israeli prime minister, on that. Also, this big divide where Trump said we want our allies to pay for their own defense, but he made an exception for Israel. He says we've got to take care of Israel. And he surrounded himself with pro-Zionists, Mike Pence obviously being one, and David Friedman, his ambassador to Israel, is ardently pro-settler. And then at his inauguration, you saw him introduced Now, by the way, I'm half Jewish. I'm not speaking out of anti-Semitism, but it's introduced by a Jewish senator, Chuck Schumer. And then right after his inauguration speech, the immediate invocation, there were 3 people giving the invocation. But the first time ever that a Orthodox rabbi gave the invocation, it was Simon Wiesenthal, Center founder, Rabbi Marvin Heyer. And he didn't talk about Trump or America. He talked about Zion and Jerusalem. And I really took that as a message to the Zionists that he's going to work with them. Now, when you put that together with his invitation to Netanyahu to come to the White House this month, and to put that together with the new Iran sanctions and the fact that he's got a war cabinet with a lot of generals like Mad Dog Mattis, I am very concerned that we're setting up for war. And as Kevin Barrett was saying, the main instigator of war would be some kind of false flag, and you can be sure that either Western intelligence services or more likely the Mossad would have a hand in that. They've done it before. They could easily do it again.
It's a terrible thing to contemplate, isn't it? And yet it's so plausible and it's so possible. And I've even said this to some of my friends who are staunch Trump supporters. And they're my friends, so I'm not going to fall out with them. And I say to them, look at what, and I've quoted you, James, I've quoted you particularly, and 1 or 2 others, because there aren't very many people talking about Trump's Zionist connections. And I've said, look at the Geist connections, as eloquently described there by you. And I said, even if Trump is, his own man, and even if he's a bit of a maverick and he wants to do things, it can be completely changed. His whole world can be brought down around him by a false flag event to change everything, to change the course of the presidency. Help me out here. Am I right in saying, now don't laugh if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right, before 9/11, some of the policies of Bush Jr., they weren't half bad, James, were they? There was 1 or 2 things he was interested in doing. It looked like it was going to be a pretty calm watch under George W. Bush before 9/11. Or am I completely talking through my backside?
Well, it did start out calmly.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were relieved that the Clintons, who had Evelyn de Rothschild and his wife honeymoon at the White House, were out of the White House. But there is an analogy here, which you had George Bush in his first year in office, after replacing a 2-term Democrat, suddenly having 9/11 on his lap. And it does give you an uncomfortable feeling of deja vu to see Donald Trump as a first-year Republican president replacing a 2-term Democrat again with that potential. And one of the things that worries me is the cover of The Economist magazine, which, as you know, is half owned by the Rothschilds. Evelyn de Rothschild's wife has been involved with that magazine. And on the cover of their World in 2017 issue, they've got a set of tarot cards, and on the death card is a nuclear weapon exploding. Now, as you know, the cover of The Economist has been rather infamous for predicting events, and it does worry me that might be a hint that we could see something in the way of a nuclear event taking place that would push us over the brink and into a situation that, even if Trump wanted to be his own man, would be hard for him to resist.
James, I could talk to you all day. I really mean that. Come back real soon. Folks, go to jamesperloff.com. I've said this before and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I am no sycophant. If you pick up a book tomorrow, if you want to pick up a book tomorrow, get The Shadows of Power as a starting point. The Council on Foreign Relations in the American Decline. It's a book for the ages. James, thanks for your help today, mate. Anytime you want to come back on, if you've got something to say, don't wait for the invite. Lovely to chat with you.
I won't. By the way, my latest book, which is an update of The Shadows of Power, is called Truth is a Lonely Warrior. It's a primer on the New World Order. Fantastic stuff, mate. Terrific. Thanks, James. Talk to you soon. Thank you so much, Richie. Anytime. The great James Perloff on the line to us there from New York City.